Pretty much all consumer products sold to the public are based on supply and demand. The more people want it, the more is going to be made. And this is just as much true as it is for Rice Krispie treats as it is for action figures. But there's a catch, because action figures, especially with the adult collector, remain, well, collectible. So, how does a toy company figure out whether or not to re-release a figure to meet demand while still maintaining secondary market value? What I mean by that is a lot of collectors buy things because, well, they're worth money, they're worth pride, they're worth, well, being able to say you have a complete collection and you'll go hunting for these at toy shows or online. There's a lot of work, a lot of sweat, a lot of energy that goes into completing a collection. So it becomes valuable. And therefore, keeping a figure's value on the secondary market does become extremely important with toy making and selling toys to those who collect toys for the long term. The other big questions to ask are, has enough time passed between the original release and being able to sell the same exact figure? And then, of course, is there a large enough buying audience to justify going back into production? So, how in the world do toy companies take all of this into account and still maintain value on the secondary market? It's not an easy thing. All right, let's dive in and talk about how this, well, how it works, because there isn't a standard, but there is a lot of thought that goes into it. Let's look at something like comic books to sort of set the stage. When comic books have a second run, when there's a very popular issue, for example, of a character that a lot of people know and a popular artist, companies will often do a second run of that issue, and usually that run is changed slightly. Maybe the cover art is different, or the background art for the cover is different. Whatever it is, there's usually something visual that can instantly tell the collector, this is a second run, this is a second printing, this is not the original, but it will give you the same story, you just won't have the same aftermarket value. So where does that come from, and how do toy companies find ways to do this? In classics, in Motu Classics, we've slapped a The Original burst on all the second runs, which was done deliberately to try to maintain value for those customers who bought the first run and wanted to have the pride and the status symbol of having that original version. The first run of a comic, the first run of a toy, etc. Because, well, collectors, we treasure our product and we want to be able to display it, and we want to know that the product in there is authentic and real and original. Now, sometimes the original is unaffordable. For example, Action Comics #1 is not exactly something we can all go out and buy, but Loot Crate a few years ago did a perfect one-to-one reprint. So for those of you who wanted to actually pick up and read Action Comics #1, well, you have an option of doing that. It doesn't have the value from a monetary standpoint, the same way an original first edition of a book has more value, but you can still read anytime, a reissue, a reprint. The other big question to ask with a collectible toy, has enough time passed between the original release and a second version? Now, whether that version is a new version or a direct re-release is really the question. So let's look at a great example. Marvel's Rogue from Marvel Legends, X-Men, the Jim Lee animated series called the 1992-ish look. So this Rogue was first made available in Marvel Legends in one of their very first X-Men waves, which came out, well, over 5, 6, 7 years ago. And for those who are collecting the 1992-ish X-Men, this is a key character. I knew I wanted to buy this version of Rogue because I eventually wanted this team. So I knew buying her for the long run was going to help me complete this team. I passed on other versions of Rogue because, well, I wanted the Jim Lee version. And even though the whole team wasn't available when the Jim Lee version was issued, well, I knew that buying her then and there was going to help pay off because eventually, and it took about 10 years, I would get the whole team. Now, because this was the first of the Jim Lee figures put out, Hasbro re-released the original version, which is this one, that came with the Juggernaut piece, as a retro figure at Target. Now, the hair was changed, the colors of the outfit were changed slightly, it was a new head sculpt, but it was basically the same figure. So if you're a long-term collector and you had picked up the original Rogue, well, the value was still there. But if you'd missed her and you wanted to get Rogue for your collection, well, this was an option. It's not a perfect replacement. New head, brighter colors, more sort of animated colors, if you will, and it even came with a different hand accessory. But it fulfilled the same need. Let's look at another example from Hasbro this time. So this is the Black Series Han Solo in Carbonite. Originally, now this figure here is being released on a single card, sold individually, but this accessory or figure was originally an accessory to a Black Series Boba Fett at San Diego Comic-Con. It was a way of plussing up Boba Fett for the show. So the status symbol, if you will, was getting the Han and Carbonite. If you were able to get to the show and pick up Boba Fett, you didn't just have a Boba Fett, because, getting a Black Series Boba Fett wasn't that hard. He's been reissued a few times. But the Carbonite and the stand was what was exclusive to the show. So while you could have any number of Boba Fetts in your collection, and you could get the same version of Boba Fett that was available at the show, getting that accessory was never issued again. All of the other Boba Fetts just had paint job changes or packaging changes. The accessory remained exclusive. But once it was released on a single card, you could essentially recreate that San Diego Comic-Con experience by removing the figures from the packaging, and now loose, you had the same exact things that you had in the Comic-Con pack. So, does that now devalue this pack? For those who made it out to the show or paid big money for it, now that it's been reissued and you could recreate this figure, at least from a loose standpoint, you're not going to be able to recreate it packaged. So it kind of makes you wonder, where are your loyalties? Are they to having a complete collection, having the original release? Does it matter when something is loose versus packaged? And that's really the core of the entire concept, is the value and the pride that we put as collectors on having the original item. When it's reissued, how much does that take away? Is it just for those of us who collect loose, who just want that item, and the frustration maybe of not being able to get it because we weren't there at Comic-Con years ago, or when that Rogue was sold in that very early X-Men wave? So there's a reward for long-term collectors, but for new collectors coming in, they've missed out, and that's why items often get re-released. And when it's a successful re-release, in order to have a full set, if you will, well, changing it slightly is often the way toy companies go. This is done both to reward long-term customers who got the original release, and now provide some type of solution for new customers. But the bigger issue is the whole, and I've brought this up before, the Venn diagram MOQ. The MOQ is the minimum number of units a company has to order. So that MOQ doesn't always match up, and a second run can be done, and if no changes are made, if the exact same toy reissued, you often wind up with a situation like this, where a significant portion of the public already has it, so even though there are some people online being very loud, it's not enough to justify the minimum order quantity that a company has to produce to in order to go into a second run. Which is why it's much, much smarter to do the comic book model and make a change to the toy. Yes, the original figure may be out of reach and you may not be able to have that version, but at least a version is available to you. In other words, you're still putting value in long-term collectors' pockets and making them feel good about their commitment to the brand and the fact that they have been involved for so long, while at the same time welcoming in new customers. Because if you want to have a X-Men collection or a Boba Fett Bespin collection, you need those items. You need Rogue, you need the Carbonite block, etc., etc. So finding ways to re-release them but make them just different enough, well, it helps new collectors come on board so they can also build a giant collection of all the figures they want and won't feel like they were missing out just because they were sort of late to the game or later to the game. Yes, you can get this Rogue. Is it the exact Rogue that was released in Wave 1? No. Is it better? To some. So that is often why toy companies are struggling with the whole re-release. Has enough time passed? Are there enough customers to even justify it? And how do we change it enough? I hope this video was insightful, and if there's any questions remaining, let me know. I'd love to answer them. Leave them in the comments below. Thanks for sharing and watching, and I'll see you in the next video.